This is Sarah Koenig, host of the Serial Podcast. I want to tell you about our new show, Nice White Parents. Reporter Hannah Jaffe-Walt spent years looking into this one middle school in her neighborhood. She investigated the school's history and finally realized she could put a name to the unspoken force that kept getting in the way of making the school better. White parents. How white parents can mess things up for everyone else without even knowing it. Nice White Parents is made by Serial Productions, a New York Times company. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts.
From NJ.com, this is Talk is Cheap, a New York Giants podcast. We're talking Big Blue football all year round.
What's going on, everybody? Zack Rosenblatt back here for the latest episode of the Talk is Cheap podcast. No more Mike K, thank God. But we got the original co-host back. Darryl Slater is back from his absence. He was dealing with some stuff. But he's back, and we're happy to have him back. Darryl, how much of that game on Sunday did you get to watch when you were doing? Because it was a pretty big win, obviously.
Yeah, so I was in the hospital for 5 days, but it wasn't like well, I guess it was an emergency thing. But went on Friday and got out Wednesday and was able. I actually watched all the Jet game and all the Giant game. So I had a little staph infection in my elbow, and I guess as far as staph infections go, it was little, but kind of one of those things where you got to be on a lot of IV antibiotics. So I felt fine, whatever, and they were able to like get me all fixed up, and good folks at Overlook Hospital and Summit are just awesome. And yeah,
I heard you have a robotic arm now, right?
No robotic arm, just a
okay.
small little hole in my arm from where they drained all the gross stuff out of it.
Yeah, it wasn't fun.
So yeah, just standard antibiotic, and then I didn't even get any good painkillers. So I did for a little bit, but yeah, it was fine, and very comfortable place to not only recover from something like this and get pumped full of IV antibiotics, but also, and of course that's why I couldn't do the podcast with you last week, but and wasn't able to cover the game, but I was able to watch the game. And
yeah, I was going to say, before we get into the Giants, can you tell the story you told me about what happened when you were watching the Jets game? Because I think it's hilarious.
Yeah, so this is Sunday, and I had been in the hospital since Friday afternoon, and it's not, whatever. I'm just trying to find some normalcy, and not really much to do, of course. So I what the heck, I'll put the Jet game on. So I'm texting with you guys, and I'm watching the Jet game, and of course, what happened at the end of the game happened, and
the Greg Williams zero blitz thing, yeah.
Right, Greg Williams zero blitz, and then the long touchdown pass on Lamar Jackson, the Jets cornerback version of Lamar Jackson, and I go, "Oh my God!" And I didn't like scream it, but just kind of like that, "Oh my God!" And the door was open to my room, and the nurses station was like right there. So two of the nurses, like, they heard me and they came running. Like, "Are you okay?" I was like, "Oh yeah, sorry, just the Jets." And they were just Greg Williams. And so they laughed. They got a kick out of that. And I had to, and then I realized like, I should probably be quiet, because I was actually, because of COVID, they've really overhauled their hospital layout there at Overlook and Summit. And so I was actually on a wing of the pediatric floor, which was kind of weird. But they had the kids on one wing of this floor and the adults on the other. So it's not like they got to hear any of my like ranting about football. But that was really it. I didn't have much energy besides that. But as tired as I was able to muster what basically everyone else was feeling and saying at that time across New Jersey, except that I guess maybe no one else didn't draw the attention of nurses who thought they had like fallen out of bed. And
you had that unique experience.
Yeah, sure. I don't know what they thought had happened. They probably thought I fell out of bed or something, but I almost did. I mean, that was crazy. The Giant game, of course, less eventful in terms of a single event. We talked about this after the game. We were texting because someone asked like, "Oh, was it a crazy game?" There wasn't like a crazy moment, but it was pretty crazy that they went out there to Seattle and won with Colt McCoy, right?
Yeah, not only that they won with McCoy, but that they completely shut down Russell Wilson. Their defense have been good all year, but like if you look at, especially their wins, but even just like in general, a lot of the offenses the defense have played well against were not good offenses. Seattle was at either top or top 5 in passing offense going in that game. Russell Wilson was an MVP candidate. He's probably not now. And the Giants held them to 12 points. When that game ends, I think the biggest takeaway is just that Patrick Graham. I mean, we've talked about him almost every week. Even when they were losing, we were complimentary. But it's almost at the very minimum, it feels like a lock he's going to get some interviews this offseason now for a head coaching job.
Definitely. And, not to be cynical, but let's be honest. I mean, he's a minority candidate. And even if some of those interviews are for jobs that this happens all the time, of course, have no intention of hiring him, he might be a guy who they bring in to fulfill the Rooney role, which is what teams do. I mean, and it's not necessarily a good thing.
But he's getting in the door, though, for sure, yeah.
But I was going to say, setting all that aside, and this is the case with Eric Bieniemy too. Like, these guys, and especially Eric Bieniemy, are like obviously very deserving head coaching candidates. I don't know if Patrick Graham is a shoo-in right now, but I think he's getting himself in that position. And you know what? Even if he does get what, it's a stupid word, but token interview right now, I'm sure he'll take it, and I'm sure he'll say, you know what, I'm going to go in there and show these guys, what I'm made of, and it can't hurt to get your foot in the door. And I would be surprised if he gets a job this offseason, wouldn't you? I think it's probably another.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the thing that Patrick Graham has, I think if you get in a room with him, I think he's going to impress anybody that interviews him. So that, and I think that's kind of, like, you look at it's a little different, but what happened with Joe Judge, nobody had even considered the possibility that nobody heard of Joe Judge before. Nobody legitimate that wasn't in league circles had actually known who Joe Judge was before January or whenever they interviewed him. And then he went in the room and he wowed. He obviously had the background that he did with Bill Belichick, Saban, and all that. But he wowed John Mara, Gettleman, Steve Tisch. He just wowed them in the room. And I think Patrick Graham is just, number one, he's extremely smart. He kind of plays. He's really happy-go-lucky, fun personality in when we talk to him, and he's always like, "Oh, I'm not smart enough to think about anything like that. I don't know." And then someone will say a metaphor, an idiom, and he's like, "Oh, you're gonna have to start over. I don't know what that means." He always plays up I'm a big dummy. I don't know what you're talking about. But when in reality, behind the scenes, I did a story on Leonard Williams, and I talked to him, and I was asking him about Patrick Graham, and he said that the team calls him the computer because he has an ability to, it's like the Sean McVay thing. He has an ability to recall a play from years ago, the exact moment when it happened. And he'll be like, 2015 game against the Bengals, I believe it was play 53 and this happened. And then they go and do it. And it's exactly right. So he's one of those beautiful mind types. And on top of that, you're just seeing every single week, they do something different. He's so good at adjustments. I've seen a lot about how involved Logan Ryan is with that too. And he's made a huge impact too, obviously, but Patrick Graham just week to week, I imagine it's pretty difficult to prepare for this team. And I think it's kind of hidden a lot of their problems, because if you look at, the number 2 cornerback spot, they've made Isaac Yiadom look like a capable NFL cornerback, which, as you and I talked about on this podcast earlier in the season, he did not look like that. And I don't know if that's them coaching him up or putting him in the right spots or whatever. And then an outside linebacker, they've lost all 4 of their top guys. They traded Golden, Lorenzo Carter, O'Shane Zimenez, and Kyler Fackrell are all on injured reserve. And then this last game, Jabal Sheard, Carter Coughlin, Cam Brown, and Nico Lalos all played the best game that group has played all year. So he's putting all these guys in perfect positions. They're making plays when they have to, and they seem to love playing for him. People maybe weren't talking about Patrick Graham before the Seahawks game, but they certainly are now.
Yeah, I mean, that was the showcase game. That's the type of game that puts you on the radar of teams going forward, whether it's for jobs in this hiring cycle or after the 2021 season. Certainly, he deserves a lot of credit for what the Giants were able to do in Seattle on Sunday, and another challenge coming up against Kyler Murray on this coming Sunday at MetLife Stadium.
Yeah, it's funny. Something I've noticed with Giants fans who are obsessed with Patrick Graham now, if they weren't already, is all the stories are coming out okay, he's going to be a head coaching candidate or at some point. And they're like, no, he's terrible. You don't want Patrick Graham. Take Jason Garrett. He'd be a great head coach. People just saying, no, you want Jason Garrett. He's done it before, And the funny thing is, as bad as Jason Garrett's been, he just feels like one of those guys where, because the NFL, they just recycle coaches like it's nothing.
Totally.
Yeah. These owners going with a known commodity. It's often, unfortunately, a white coach when it's the case. And Jason Garrett kind of just fits the mold of a guy who coached for 10 years. His teams are all competitive. If they base it off his performance as a Giant, I still don't think he's done a great job. Their offense still hasn't even played well in this winning streak. If you look at it, the defense has really carried them. Daniel Jones is playing well in the sense that he hadn't turned the ball over before he got hurt, but he wasn't producing touchdowns. It's been all the running game, which I don't know how much of that is Jason Garrett, how much of that is the offensive line improving. And it's been still a lack of big plays. And so I think that's kind of you and I had talked about this offline a little bit, I think, but it still feels like these last 4 games are still like Jason Garrett coaching for his job on the Giants staff, let alone if somebody hires him outside of the Giants.
Sure. I think it's still a possibility that this team, say, wins the division with, maybe 7 wins, and then they go one and done in the playoffs. And if Joe Judge looks at it and says, I'm going to make a change at offense coordinator, I don't think that would be a surprise. We talked a little bit before we came on about the offensive line's improvement. And, that's so hard to quantify. So I just called up the Pro Football Focus grades for the Giants line this year. And let's see, like pass blocking in the past 4 games, I'll just kind of round to these numbers: 64, 50, 69, 63, and these are out of 100. And so some of those are pretty good. 69, 64, not bad. But if you look at before this 4-game winning streak, you're talking about numbers 56, 40, 49, 38.
Yes. So you're seeing the difference in an offensive line being terrible and average is significant.
And yeah, I mean, looking at 49.4, I said 49 there. That was against Washington in the game they won. I mean, you talk about, run blocking. You said how well they've been running the ball the past couple weeks, 66 and then 72 the week before that. These past couple weeks, they've been running the ball and run blocking very well. According to Pro Football Focus, I mean, they look at the game film, they grade it. So it's not definitive, but it's a good comparison point to what they were doing before. I mean, you look at during the couple game losing streak that they had before this current 4-game winning streak. I mean, their run blocking grades are 59, 47. So obviously not very good, so they've improved as a line, certainly before Mark Colombo's firing, and certainly have continued to improve since he was replaced.
Yeah. I think probably the biggest difference on the offensive line in general, though, is Andrew Thomas, because as you and I have talked about plenty on this pod, he was obviously brutal over the season. This last game, he didn't allow a single pressure, which is a significant progress considering he led the NFL in pressures for a while. Just pulling up his performance. Like, he had 87 grade, which is among the league leaders. He hasn't allowed a pressure in 2 weeks.
Wow.
He's only allowed 1 sack over the last 5 games. Like, he's kind of like one of the most important players, and they already moved past the point where whether they pick the wrong guy or not, they need Andrew Thomas to work out, and he's starting to get a lot better. I think people are going to overestimate the impact of changing offensive line coaches. I think a lot of it more has to do with them getting more comfortable as the season has gone along. I think Colombo probably deserves some credit for how they've gotten better, and I'm sure DeGuglielmo has obviously helped too, and just bringing a little different perspective, I guess. But
one thing he mentioned, DeGuglielmo, initially, he said, I'm not going to overhaul how we're doing things. And that's obviously the smart approach, So I don't think he would look at this and say, like, oh, I deserve necessarily a ton of credit for this, because they're not going to overhaul how they're doing things. I mean, that was the best game for Andrew Thomas. If you look at Pro Football Focus, I don't know if any of you guys have a subscription, but they have like little color coded things, right? So in crummy grades are like a little red square next to them. And I'm looking at Thomas's season, and you could see it plain as day. He only has like 3 of these blue square grades, which I guess must mean in the 80s or better. And they're all across the board. Off his total grade, his pass block, and his run block grade, all in Seattle. The peak of his season so far. And even during his winning streak, like for instance against the Eagles, he was bad. He had a 40 run block grade and he allowed 4 pressures. Last 2 weeks, much better. So let's see if he can keep it going. I mean, this is not yet the definitive standard, right? This isn't necessarily his baseline of, that he is who he is right now in terms of success, but still allowed 44 pressures this year, which is insane.
Yeah.
But,
and that's with 2 straight 0 weeks too. So,
but you know what? I mean, if you're him, it's almost like a cornerback or whatever short memory or whatever sports analogy you use. You got to have kind of a short memory and understand that like this was never going to be easy. And the whole thing here for him is, let's see if it gets easier as the season goes on, and it looks like it is right now. So that's good news for him and good news for the Giants.
Yeah, and jumping off the offensive line thing, I feel like one guy we should shout out. I think we've talked about him a little bit here. Is Wayne Gallman has just, especially the last couple weeks. Last week was his best game of his career. He didn't score a touchdown after scoring in 5 straight games, but he just seems like a guy that, like, if the Giants had ever actually given him touches, he seems like a guy who like needs that build up, that ramp up period until he gets into his groove. And now he's like playing like great. I think he's among the league leaders in yards after contact since he became like the starter. For whatever reason, the Giants just always like resisted giving him a chance. Like
Saquon Barkley.
Yeah, Saquon got hurt last year, And then they signed Buck Allen and started playing him over Wayne Gallman. Buck Allen, who's out of the league now. And then this year, Saquon goes down again, and they signed Devontae Freeman. And it took Freeman going down to give it to Wayne Gallman finally. And I mean, I'm sure a lot of it has to do with the run blocking, but he's like a fun running back to watch because he like does not go down easy. They can call him the Wayne train. He seems to be really popular in the locker room. I don't know if he's earned himself a lot of money because running backs don't really make that much money anymore, free agency wise, and there's a lot of good free agents, but I don't know. It's interesting to see him become a reliable player because I don't know if I saw that coming. Just like I thought there had to be a reason why they just weren't trusting him before. Maybe there was, but he seems to have figured it out.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like obviously they drafted him in the 4th round, 2017, and then they go ahead and get Saquon Barkley the next year, and he became an afterthought basically immediately in his career. I mean, he was not a starting player in 2017 as a rookie, but he did have 476 yards. The next 2 years, he did basically nothing because they relied on Saquon Barkley. Already this year, 504 yards, 6 touchdown career high. And then you mentioned last week, 135. He ran for 94 the week before. In this stretch, since last 6 games, he's really turned it on. I mean, he has. And you said even with no touchdowns the last 2 weeks, six touchdowns the last 6 games, so 6 in the previous 5 before last week, and has really become a productive player. And a nice guy, always a steady guy, steady character guy. Probably his ceiling is that of a backup running back. I don't know if he's going to get starter running back money, but he's certainly earning himself a lot of money down the stretch here. And I think the notion of like, oh, should the Giants re-sign him now or whatever, like, he would be crazy. He would be absolutely crazy to not do free agency. Unless he's got something going on injury-wise, like I'm sure he doesn't, that like nobody knows about, right? Like that he's somehow keeping hidden.
Yeah.
Like then, of course, but that's not the case. And so it would be insane to like, I'm sure the Giants would love to lock him up for a decent price right now, but he should go and try to find a team that's desperate, that's willing to, and maybe foolish enough to give him a larger role. Now, like I'm not trying to knock this guy, but I just don't know if that's who he is long term. But he's certainly putting himself in.
It wouldn't be the holiday season if there wasn't candy, right? Celebrate the holiday season with the Holiday Crush. They've sprinkled candy with a holiday theme and fun-packed challenges every week for 5 whole weeks, finishing on January 4th. The more challenges you complete, the better your chances of unwrapping delicious rewards. So, are you ready to crush the holidays? Play the Holiday Crush now. Download it from the App Store, Google Play, or Windows Store for free. Terms and conditions apply.
Position to maybe make some teams think that, isn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. The funny thing I keep thinking, like even just talking about this and how they're making it work with Wayne Gallman, and like early in the season when their offense, I mean the offense still isn't that great, honestly. The running game's good now, but you and I had written something about how like Dave Gettleman's philosophies are so outdated, and like the quotes that he had from early on, and how they were trying to build a running team in a passing league, and it like. This is the fruit of like his stuff. Like they're a running team that like beats you with defense and running, but that's because they can't pass the ball more than like it's the right philosophy, I think. And you know, Dave's got a lot of praise recently because they've turned it around, and I think a lot of his moves in 2020 have worked out. I think there's a lot of discussion to be had about, you know, how much Joe Judge was involved in a lot of those decisions, but I think the one thing that is clear that he messed up on, and I think it's been obvious since the beginning, is that he didn't add any weapons on offense. And,
right.
Like you're seeing that with like Darius Slayton has kind of faded away. He's clearly not a number. He needs someone who can like take coverage away from him. I think Sterling Shepard's reliable. You don't want him to be your best receiver. Golden Tate, they don't even really. I mean, he makes a big catch every now and then. They don't play him that much. Evan Ingram is probably the most talented one, but he also makes at least one major mistake every game. And it's like it's week to week. It's the same exact thing with that guy. He'll have like an insane turnover, and then he'll have 3 great catches. And like you have to decide which of those you are happier or saddest with. And that, you know, that just made me think like if they had a really good receiver, I wonder how much different. I mean, that might have been the difference in a couple games, honestly.
I mean, how many of these 17-12, 19-17 games are you going to win? Right?
Yeah, exactly. Like at some point, that luck runs out, and the defense.
Exactly.
You can't expect the defense to do that every week.
You can't win like that in today's NFL. You need more weapons. Now, they're not going to go and necessarily overhaul the offensive line by drafting a lineman high again probably this year, of course, because they just did it with Thomas. But the one position where I think they need to make a splash in free agency next year is that they have to go get or the draft. They have to go get a weapon for Daniel Jones. They have to.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, what they have right now simply doesn't cut it in terms of the receiving game. And we've seen how like relatively easily replaceable a running back is.
Yeah.
So again, it was not the right decision to draft Saquon Barkley. It just wasn't. He's been a good
I
player.
think that's, I mean, how good Gallman has been makes that as obvious as it's ever been.
Totally. But I mean, the one thing that you can't paper over, like, yeah, you can kind of paper over Saquon Barkley's absence. You said it though. The one thing you can't paper over is lack of weapons in the passing game, and eventually that's going to come back to bite them. And now, is it a success if this team with this roster wins a division with even like 7 wins and then maybe even loses in the playoffs? Absolutely, that's progress, and that might be enough to keep Dave Gettleman around. And it probably will be enough to keep him around, but this team has significant holes that are preventing it from going further right now. And if you look at it, of course they do. Of course they do. But as you look, anyone would acknowledge that. But as you look at it, maybe the biggest, and I know we talk about edge rusher, maybe the biggest is that number one target, right, in the passing game. Like,
yeah,
if they can get Kenny Galladay in free agency, if they don't,
I was going to say that's what I was about to say. I'm interested to see how they approach free agency because number one, you have the salary cap that's lowering. And then number two, I think you have 3 pretty important guys. You probably are only be able to resign 1 or 2 of them, and that's Leonard Williams, Dalvin Tomlinson, and Logan Ryan. I get the impression they're probably going to try and bring Leonard Williams back. With how good he's been, he has 8.5 sacks. He's kind of quieted a lot of the noise around that trade that Dave made, fair or not. And he's going to demand a salary among the league leaders. I mean, I wrote all about this, and I had people tell me that he's like, I think Chris Jones on the Chiefs signed a 4-year, $85 million deal, which is like more than $20 million a year. I think Leonard is within his right to ask for around that range based on how he's playing this year. And that's a lot of money to devote to one player. And it would mean they're probably not going to be able to re-sign Dalvin Tomlinson at that point. You would probably have to get Logan Ryan at a little bit of a discount, which I don't know if he'll want because he might make the Pro Bowl this year. And then on top of that, you have to decide, so do you want to re-sign Logan Ryan and or Dalvin, or do you want to go and spend $18 million a year on Kenny Galladay, which is a lot of money for a receiver, but you need a receiver, or do you want to go and spend that on an edge rusher? Like they're really going to have to thread the needle this offseason, and it kind of comes back to like, do you trust Dave Gettleman to thread that needle ultimately?
I still think it's still up in the air whether he's back next year, because you have to look at the totality of it. You can't just look at this team having won 4 straight games and say, oh, that's why he should be back. No, you have to look at the totality of his decisions, the good and the bad of what he's done. Like,
and if Joe Judge likes working with him is an important part of it.
Absolutely. And there have been decisions that have proved to have turned out well this year. James Bradbury, Blake Martinez, but then there are of course other ones, big money that he spent that have demonstratively turned out to be poor decisions. Nate Solder, Golden Tate. Those are done. Those decisions are finalized as being bad. So
I mean, they wouldn't even have Logan Ryan if Nate Solder didn't opt out. They wouldn't be able to afford to sign Logan Ryan. So that contract's going to come back to bite him again next year.
Right. And if you talk about cap space and threading the needle, right now the Giants at overthecap.com with a projection of $176 million cap, the Giants have $18 million in cap space next year, and that's what 4 or 5. That's probably middle of the pack
And then I guess you can cut Golden Tate, cut Solder, I guess, and get a dead cap and a couple other guys. Probably get it up to like $25 million.
Zeitler, they probably cut Zeitler. They wouldn't cut Solder, right? I wouldn't think they could cut.
Well, I don't know. I mean, Solder could also retire. Honestly, I wouldn't rule that out.
That's possible. So there's a lot of ways that, but of course you got to look at it like this: other teams are going to increase their cap space too, with things like that happening. So right, like the Jets have $78 million in cap space; they're number 2. But I'm sure there's a couple guys on their roster that they are going to cut loose that are going to result in some whatever.
I mean, the Jets cut a guy who they then nominated for the Walter Payton Award a few weeks later, which is the most sad thing of all time.
Good off season, bad off seasons for cornerbacks. I mean, in this market, the Jets signing Pierre Desir versus the Giants signing James Bradbury, and I know the Desir contract was a 1-year deal, not nearly as much of a financial commitment as Bradbury.
It was as big of a need for the Jets, though.
But yeah, that turned out to be a complete disaster. Whereas Bradbury, a guy who, people didn't necessarily know what he was going to bring, has certainly turned out to be a great signing and is very much earning his money. And look, the bottom line is no one expects every signing to work out all the time. It's just that like when you devote enormous money to a really important position like number 1 corner, like number one receiver or like edge rusher, pass rusher, then you need to make sure it works. So I think with Dave Gettleman and Leonard Williams, if you're going to throw a lot of money at him based on his pass rush numbers this year, when previously he's kind of underwhelmed in that department, you got to think like, what is this guy more than just a one-year wonder in that department? He's always been a really good run stopper. We know he's one of the better interior defensive linemen in the league, but is he what you need in terms of a pass rushing presence? He has been this year. Let's see if he can carry it forward. I think, even talking to Leonard at the end of last year about, coming when he was quote unquote entering free agency for the first time, right?
Yeah.
Before they tagged him, he's always been very candid about this. And I know he talked to you about it as well this December. He views himself as one of the better defensive linemen in the league. He's never really batted an eye over the poor sack numbers. I mean, if you look at his PFF numbers, they're pretty good overall in terms of where he rates as among interior defensive linemen, but he's always considered himself, and he's real about it. I mean, he said, look, I don't know if I deserve Aaron Donald money. It's what he was talking about last December when I talked to him, but he said, I feel like I deserve to get paid like one of the better defensive linemen in the league. And of course, now he definitely has every right to feel that way. But it's up to Dave Gettleman and to be certainly cold, calculated, and objective about it.
Yeah. And I mean, they pretty much, so what I was told is that they had tried offering him a multi-year deal, pretty much knowing that he probably wouldn't accept it because they weren't going to offer as much as the franchise tag. But and I think something that played into it is that they knew the perception around the trade and how Leonard only had a half a sack, and you can't really go and pay $18 million to a guy per season that had a half a sack. So they franchise tagged him. Leonard didn't take it personally. I get the impression that they're going to circle back, and the Giants are, they are kind of cornered here because, his Leonard's people fully well know what the Giants went through to get him. They gave up all they did, fully well knowing he was about to be a free agent. And so if they really want him back, they're going to have to pay up. Probably more than he would get on the open market. That's kind of how it works with a big time guy. And then you just have to hope that he doesn't revert back to the guy that wasn't getting sacks.
Well, I'm sure he's thrilled right now that he was franchise tag because he, number one, stayed healthy, which is always the biggest concern for franchise tag guys. And number two, he played his butt off, and so now he's going to double dip. Now he got the franchise tag money, and he's going to come back next year and get long-term guaranteed money. This could not have possibly worked out any better for him.
Or he gets franchise tagged again, and that's another like $18 million guaranteed for the year. So
right. I mean, look, at some point, if you're him, you're going to want.
For
money.
sure.
He's gotten paid quite a bit of money in his career because of where he was drafted. I don't have his career numbers, but this is a guy who's going to be 27 years old in June, and has been in the league for what? This is his sixth year, so next year will be year 7. So I don't know how many more contracts he has left in him after this next one. This might be it, So if you're him, you want to hit it big next offseason, of course.
Yeah. All right, we talked a lot of big picture. I think we can spin it to the Cardinals game a little bit here. I'll say Daniel Jones, I think, is gearing towards coming back most likely. He was listed as questionable this week. He was doubtful last week. He's been limited most of the week, but he's been kind of been ramping it up as it goes along. They've been like playing it cautious with their words and interviews and stuff. But I feel pretty good about saying he'll probably play on Sunday, whether he's like his full self and running around. I don't know. But I think even at that, he's probably more capable than Colt McCoy. And then, on the defense, Blake Martinez, I'm a little less sure that he's going to play this week. He's their quarterback of their defense, which would be a pretty big loss. I'm a little more concerned about, he calls the plays. He's a leader. They're one of their best players, and their only other inside linebacker that you can rely on is a 7th round pick. That was Mr. Irrelevant and Tate Crowder. I've seen people suggest that maybe they play Xavier McKinney more now. They just do a lot of defensive back stuff and just roam everybody around. But I would say, especially going against Kyler Murray, DeAndre Hopkins, Kenyon Drake, like that. My concern at this point is about Blake Martinez not playing potentially.
Yes. I mean, we talk about these cornerback receiver matchups, like it's almost Sandlot football to a degree. And yeah, I mean, the James Bradbury, DK Metcalf matchup deserved a lot of attention, just like Bradbury, DeAndre Hopkins does too. I mean, these are big proving time matchups, but those, like the Blake Martinez thing is like, people don't necessarily always see how important he is to their defense. Like to have a really good middle linebacker like him, to have a cerebral piece in the middle of your defense like that. Those sort of things sort of fly under the radar. And so maybe you won't necessarily notice it on Sunday if he doesn't play, about like, oh man, why are they off here? Why are they off there? But he's certainly a big part of it. And I think that that could be a problem. I think that could be a significant problem for them defensively. For as much as Giants fans should be happy that Daniel Jones is coming back, I think the Blake Martinez injury ought to be rather concerning.
Yeah, absolutely. So where do you stand in this game? We should say, I think earlier in the season, if we had been talking about this game, we would have just assumed the Giants would lose it. I think based on how they've played recently, how the Cardinals have really kind of fallen. They've lost 3 in a row. Their offense has been kind of a mess. Kyler has been playing it. He's not an MVP candidate anymore. They're only 6-6, so they're only a game ahead of the Giants. They're still more talented for sure on both sides of the ball. I think the Giants won't really face many teams that they're more talented than maybe the Cowboys, I guess. But even that, it might be a stretch. But I had the Giants winning this week, mainly just because I think their defense can do it against this offense. I'm a little more skeptical. I mean, I didn't think they could beat the Seahawks, especially all the scenarios. Colt McCoy playing, and I thought it was their hardest game of this 4-game stretch, and then they beat them. So I think you can't count them out of any game anymore. I certainly won't be, and so I had them winning 23-17 this week.
Yeah, I think similar score-wise. I think I'm right with you there. I have Cardinals 21, Giants 20. Like you said, the Cardinals offense hasn't been great lately. Giants defense has been playing pretty well. I just, I don't necessarily trust Daniel Jones. Not that I don't trust him, but you know what I mean? Like a half-speed Daniel Jones to really be himself, which is totally reasonable. It's nothing against him. But, to come back from a hamstring injury like that, it's just tricky. Those things tend to linger. I don't know if you're going to see a lot of those dynamic type running plays from him that you normally would that have really sparked this offense so much. We talked about some of the other offensive shortcomings they have. I don't yet fully trust the Giants offense. And so I think they lose a close one. And I guess that's somewhat relatively low scoring, 21-20 to a Cardinals team that, like you said, hasn't been lighting the world on fire on offense lately, but I think they'll be able to do enough. I think this is a toss-up game. And the fact that we're talking about it like a toss-up game is a big-time credit to the Giants and Joe Judge. That they've reached a point that you can say, like, hey, they're playing this team that's clearly more talented than them, but based on what we saw last week, you can't count them out, and that this is the type of game that they're going to be able to be in. I would be surprised if this was a blowout game. I think this has all the markings of a close game. Like last week, I thought they were going to get blown out. But and then you look ahead to Browns, Ravens, Cowboys in the final 3 games. I mean, this is going to be a dogfight to the end for this Giants team to win the NFC East, and that Browns one's another fascinating one, and the Ravens are another fascinating one, because those are the games like you feel like, just sort of like this game against the Cardinals. Like they're obviously not better than those teams, but you look at how those teams have played at times. They haven't obviously been the Chiefs or the Steelers. So maybe they can steal one of those two even if they don't win this week. So this NFC East thing is going to be a kind of slog maybe to the end. I don't know, because Washington's playing pretty well too, right? So it'll be an interesting kind of battle to the end, because you have a couple teams that have kind of separated themselves.
And I think this year more than any, even just covering the Giants it's funny how quickly opinions can change in the NFL. Like a few weeks ago, number one, we wouldn't even consider the possibility that the Giants would win 4 in a row, and we'd be talking about them winning 5 in a row, and that they'd be at the top of the NFC East. We wouldn't have thought they had any chance against the Seahawks. The Cardinals looked like maybe the hardest game of the stretch, and all of a sudden the Seahawks and Cardinals look like the 2 winnable ones, and the Browns maybe look like the toughest one with how good they've been. It's just so funny how quickly opinions and things change. And if the Giants win enough games, Joe Judge will probably even he's not going to win Coach of the Year, but you'd think he'd even get 3rd place votes or something like that. Because if they finish 7-9 after starting 0-5 and 1-7, that's something worth lauding. We can wrap up on that note. As always, guys, make sure you're subscribed. We're on all the major podcast apps. Leave us some reviews. Subscribe to our text service, NJ.com/text, and we'll hit you guys back up with another episode next week. And we'll see you then.
Imagine if you could shop the shelves of your local liquor stores at the same time? Well, spoiler alert, you can with Drizzly, the #1 alcohol delivery app. Compare prices on a huge selection of beer, wine, and spirits like Tanqueray, Crown Royal, and Ciroc. Then get them delivered to your door in under 60 minutes. Right now, Drizzly is giving new customers $5 off their first order. Just enter promo code SAVE5 at checkout. Download the Drizzly app or go to drizzly.com. That's DRIZLY.com.